I found out my wife was cheating on me because a hospital nurse thought I should know the name of the man who was with her when their car wrapped around a telephone pole at 2 in the morning. That single sentence ended my marriage before I even had time to process that my wife could have died. But here's the thing nobody wants to hear. The moment I learned she wasn't alone in that car, I stopped caring if she lived or died. And I know how that sounds, but let me explain why I'm not the villain in this story. My name is Lucas Martinez. I'm 34 years old, been running heavy equipment for Chevron contractors out here in Bakersfield for the past 10 years. Started as a general laborer making $12 an hour, worked my way up to operating the big iron, excavators, cranes, bulldozers. Now, I'm pulling down $72,000 a year, got good union benefits, and enough seniority that I can usually get the day shifts. What I'm about to tell you happened 10 months ago, though. Some days, it feels like yesterday, and other days, it feels like a lifetime. I thought I had a solid marriage. We've been together for 7 years, married for 5, and we had the kind of relationship where we still kissed goodbye in the mornings and texted stupid memes to each other during my lunch breaks. You know those pictures of cats with hard hats that say, "Safety first"? That kind of dumb shit that makes you smile when you're sitting in a Caterpillar cab at 6 in the morning. My wife's name is Michelle. She's 29, works as a dental hygienist at Bakersfield Family Dentistry downtown. And she's the kind of person everyone loves at parties because she's funny and charming and knows exactly what to say to make you feel special. She's got this laugh that starts quiet and then builds up until she's practically snorting. And when she really gets going, it's infectious. Everyone ends up laughing with her, even if they don't know what's so funny. I thought I was lucky, making good money in a town where a lot of guys my age are still bouncing between temp jobs or dealing with the boom-bust cycle of the oil fields. Married to a woman who actually wanted to build a life with me in this dusty corner of the Central Valley that most people are trying to escape from. We had a nice double-wide on a half-acre lot outside the city limits, 2 paid-off vehicles, and enough savings to maybe buy a real house in a few years. Looking back now, I can see how naive that sounds, but at the time, I genuinely believed we were happy. Michelle would pack my lunch every morning, always threw in some little note or drew a smiley face on my thermos. I'd come home covered in hydraulic fluid and dust, and she'd already have dinner started, ask me about my day like she actually cared, whether the new guy on our crew could run a compactor, or if the job site was running behind schedule. We had routines, you know. Friday nights were usually pizza and a movie on the couch. Saturdays, I'd work on my truck or help my brother with whatever project he had going on at his place in Oildale. Sundays we'd drive out to my mom's in Delano, help her with her garden, eat too much food, and argue about whether the Raiders were ever going to be worth a damn again. It was simple, but it was good, or at least I thought it was. That Friday evening in March, Michelle came into the living room with her overnight bag already packed and told me she was driving down to Visalia to see her friend Rachel Torres for the weekend. Rachel had just gone through a terrible breakup apparently, and Michelle wanted to be there for her. She said Rachel was a mess, crying all the time, not eating, the whole thing. I remember thinking how sweet it was that my wife cared so much about her friends. Rachel and Michelle had known each other since high school, and Michelle was always the one her friends called when things went sideways in their lives. She had this way of making people feel better, like whatever problem you had wasn't the end of the world. I even helped her carry her bag out to her Honda Accord. The thing's got about 180,000 miles on it, but it runs good and the AC still works, which is what matters when you're driving anywhere in the Central Valley between April and October. I asked if she needed me to check her tire pressure because it had been a while since her last oil change, and she laughed and kissed me and told me I worried too much. She said she'd be fine, that it was only an hour and a half down Highway 99, and that she'd text me when she got there. I watched her pull out of our driveway, waved like an idiot, and went back inside to catch up on some Netflix show I'd been meaning to watch. Some cop drama that Michelle couldn't stand because she said the police procedures were all wrong. I trusted her completely. That's the part that makes me want to punch something every time I think about it. I trusted her so completely that I didn't question a single word she said. When your wife tells you she's going to help a friend through a crisis, what kind of husband says no to that? What kind of person doesn't want their spouse to be loyal and caring? She texted me around 9:30 that night, saying she'd arrived safely and that Rachel was in worse shape than she'd thought. Poor thing was practically catatonic, Michelle said. Just sitting there staring at the wall, barely responding when Michelle tried to talk to her. I sent back a heart emoji and told her to give Rachel a hug from me, that breakups were rough and she was lucky to have a friend like Michelle. Then I went to bed alone, assuming my wife was being a good friend, doing what good people do when someone they care about is falling apart. I fell asleep feeling grateful I'd married someone with such a big heart, someone who would drop everything to help a friend in need. I should have known something was wrong when I woke up Saturday morning and there was no text from Michelle. Maybe a photo of her and Rachel having breakfast, or one of those mirror selfies women take when they're doing face masks or painting their nails. Something to show me they were having a girls' weekend, that Rachel was feeling better, that my wife was being the friend she'd always been. Nothing. I figured they'd slept in, maybe stayed up late talking the way women do when one of them is going through relationship drama. By noon, I was starting to feel a little weird about it, but I didn't want to be that husband who checks in every 5 minutes. Michelle had always been good about staying in touch, but she deserved some space to help her friend without me breathing down her neck. I spent Saturday working on my truck, changing the oil and rotating the tires, killing time and trying not to think about how quiet the house felt without Michelle there. Our place isn't that big. 1,200 square feet of manufactured home, sitting on a concrete foundation. But when you're used to having someone around, the silence gets loud real fast. By 6 in the evening, I'd sent 3 texts and tried calling twice, straight to voicemail. Now I was actually worried. Have you ever had that feeling where something's wrong, but you can't quite put your finger on what it is? Like when you're operating heavy machinery and something doesn't sound right with the engine, but all your gauges are showing normal? That's where I was. Michelle's phone going straight to voicemail wasn't necessarily unusual. Sometimes the towers down in Visalia get overloaded, especially on weekends when people are streaming movies or whatever. And maybe she'd forgotten to charge it, or left it in the car while she was inside with Rachel. But it was the combination of things, no morning text, no check-in, no response to my messages, that had my gut telling me something was off. By 1 in the morning, I was pacing around our living room, trying to decide if I was overreacting or if something was genuinely wrong. I almost called the police. I was literally looking up the non-emergency number for Tulare County Sheriff's Department when my phone rang. Unknown number with a 6061 area code. Local. I answered immediately, heart pounding, expecting maybe Michelle had lost her phone or borrowed someone else's to call me. "Is this Lucas Martinez?" The woman on the other end had that professional calm tone that medical people use when they're about to deliver bad news. I'd heard it before when my dad had his heart attack 3 years ago. I confirmed it was me and asked who was calling. She told me she was calling from Mercy General Hospital and that my wife Michelle had been admitted approximately an hour ago following a vehicle accident on Highway 58. She said Michelle was stable but had sustained injuries and that I needed to come in as soon as possible. Everything went blurry for a second. My wife was in the hospital. My wife had been in a car accident. My wife could have died. Highway 58. That's the east-west route that runs through Bakersfield, not the road you'd take to get to Visalia. But maybe she'd taken a different route, or stopped somewhere on the way back home. Maybe Rachel had come with her, and they'd decided to grab dinner in town. I told the nurse I was coming right away, that I could be there in 20 minutes. I was already grabbing my keys, looking around for my wallet, asking if Michelle was okay, and what had happened. The nurse explained that Michelle had a concussion, several lacerations, and a possible fractured rib. She said Michelle was conscious and asking for me, but then she added something that made my blood stop moving. "Sir, I need to inform you that your wife was not alone in the vehicle." I froze. My brain took a few seconds to process what she just said. I asked her what she meant by that. "The other passenger in the vehicle was a Mr. Ryan Foster," she said. "He was also injured in the accident and is currently being treated in the ER. Silence. Complete. Total silence. Not the silence where you're searching for words. The silence where every single thought in your head has just been deleted and replaced with a single screaming question mark. Ryan Foster. I knew that name. Not personally, but I'd heard it around the job sites. He was a foreman over at Morrison & Sons Construction, one of the bigger outfits in town. They do a lot of commercial work, shopping centers and office buildings, that kind of thing. Good company with a solid reputation. Ryan Foster was probably pulling down $85,000 a year, maybe more if he got bonuses. I'd never met the guy, but in construction everybody knows everybody, at least by reputation. Foster was divorced, had a couple kids, drove a white Ford F-350 with Morrison and Sons logos on the doors. He was the kind of guy who showed up to job sites in clean work clothes and actually knew what he was talking about when he gave instructions. What the hell was my wife doing in a car with Ryan Foster at whatever time of night they'd crashed on Highway 58? The nurse asked if I was still there, and I managed to say yes, that I was still on the line. She asked if I would be coming to the hospital tonight, and I could hear the expectation in her voice. Of course I'd be coming. What kind of husband wouldn't drop everything and race to the hospital when his wife had been in an accident? I looked around my living room at the couch where Michelle and I had watched movies together just 2 nights ago, at the photos on the wall of our wedding day, both of us grinning like idiots outside the courthouse in Bakersfield, at the coffee table where just yesterday morning we'd eaten breakfast together and she'd complained about her supervisor at the dental office, and I'd listened like a good husband, offering to beat the guy up if he kept giving her grief. I thanked her quietly for calling and said I appreciated her letting me know. She started to say something about Michelle asking for me, but I hung up before she could finish. I set my phone down on the kitchen counter very carefully, like it was made of glass and might shatter if I wasn't gentle with it. Then I sat down at our dining table and stared at the wall for what might have been 5 minutes or 5 hours. I honestly couldn't tell you. My wife had lied to me. She hadn't gone to see Rachel Torres in Visalia. She'd been somewhere with Ryan Foster, and they'd been driving on Highway 58 at whatever ungodly hour they'd crashed. Highway 58 runs east-west through Bakersfield toward the mountains, not south toward Visalia. They'd been coming from somewhere, or going somewhere, together. She'd looked me in the eyes, kissed me goodbye, let me help her pack her bag, and driven off to spend time with another man. And then she'd crashed with him in the car at 2 in the morning, coming back from wherever they'd been. Together. I didn't cry, I didn't yell, I didn't throw anything or punch the wall or do any of the things you see people do in movies when they find out they've been betrayed. I just sat there feeling like someone had reached inside my chest and scooped out everything that made me human, leaving behind just an empty shell that still knew how to breathe. That's when my marriage ended, not when I filed the papers, not when I moved out. Right there, sitting at my kitchen table at 2:30 in the morning, still wearing the Carhartt shirt I'd slept in, holding a phone that wouldn't stop buzzing with calls from the hospital that I wasn't going to answer. My wife was in the hospital asking for me, and I wasn't going to go, and everyone was going to think I was a monster, and I didn't care because the person I'd promised to love in sickness and in health had just revealed herself to be someone I didn't even know. Let me pause here for a second because I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking I should have gone to the hospital, that I should have at least made sure she was okay before making any decisions. And maybe you're right, but here's what I realized in that moment. The elaborate lie she'd constructed, the fake crisis with Rachel, the careful planning, all of it told me this wasn't a mistake. This was calculated. When someone can look you in the eyes and lie that smoothly, what else are they capable of? That question terrified me more than anything else. I didn't go to the hospital that night, and I know that makes me sound like a cold, heartless person, but let me tell you what I did instead. I sat at my kitchen table until the sun came up, staring at my phone while it buzzed and buzzed with calls from numbers I didn't recognize. And I let every single one of them go to voicemail. I wasn't being cruel. I was in shock. The kind of shock where your brain just shuts down because it can't process what's happening. Like when you're operating a 40-ton excavator and the hydraulics suddenly fail. For a split second, you can't believe what's happening because everything was working fine just a moment ago. That's where I was. Nowhere. My wife was in a hospital bed asking for me. And I was sitting in our kitchen realizing that everything I thought I knew about my life was a lie. But I couldn't just sit there forever doing nothing. So around 7 in the morning, when I figured people would actually be awake, I did the only thing that made sense to me. I called Rachel Torres, Michelle's friend, the one she was supposedly visiting, the one who was supposedly going through a terrible breakup, and needed my wife's support so desperately that Michelle had to drop everything and drive down to Visalia for the weekend. Rachel answered on the 4th ring, sounding groggy and confused, and I asked her if Michelle was still there with her. There was a long pause. Then Rachel asked me what I was talking about. Explained that Michelle had driven down Friday evening to spend the weekend with her to help her through her breakup. And was she okay? Could I talk to Michelle for a second? Another pause, longer this time. Lucas, I'm not going through a breakup, Rachel said. And Michelle's not here. I haven't seen her in like 3 weeks. Is everything okay? I thanked her, told her everything was fine, and hung up before she could ask any more questions. I felt something crack inside my chest. It wasn't the affair. I mean, yes, the affair was horrible, but people have affairs. People make mistakes. People get weak or stupid or selfish. What broke me was the lie, the planning, the deliberateness of it all. Michelle hadn't just cheated on me in a moment of weakness. She had constructed an entire false reality. She had picked Rachel's name specifically because she knew I wouldn't question it. She had invented a breakup, invented a crisis, looked me in the eyes, and told me this. Elaborate story. Let me help her pack. Let me kiss her goodbye. Let me worry about her damn tire pressure for crying out loud. She had texted me from wherever she actually was, pretending to be at Rachel's place in Visalia, telling me Rachel was worse than expected. Every single word was calculated. Every single moment was a performance. And I had believed all of it because I trusted my wife. I needed to see the car. I don't know why, exactly. Maybe I thought seeing the physical evidence would make it real, or maybe I just needed something concrete to hold on to, because my entire reality had just dissolved into nothing. I called the police department and asked where vehicles from accidents got towed, and they gave me the address of the West Side impound lot. I drove there around 10 gal in the morning in my F-250, showed them my ID and our marriage certificate along with the registration, and they let me through to examine the vehicle. Michelle's Honda Accord was worse than I'd imagined. The entire front end was crumpled like a beer can someone had stepped on. The windshield was shattered, spider-webbed with cracks radiating out from 2 impact points where heads had hit the glass. There was dried blood on the driver's side headrest that made my stomach turn, and more blood spatter on the passenger side that told me Ryan Foster had taken a pretty good knock too. But that's not what got to me. What got to me was what I found inside the car. Michelle's overnight bag was still in the back seat, partially unzipped, and I could see clothes spilling out of it. I opened the car door and pulled the bag toward me, the metal creaking as I moved it. And that's when I saw it. Lingerie, expensive lingerie. The kind she'd bought for our 5th anniversary last year. Stuff that cost more than I made in a day running equipment. Black lace, red silk, things I recognized because I'd seen them before in our bedroom. She had packed them for him. She had taken the intimate things that belonged to our marriage, things she'd worn for me on special occasions, and brought them to another man. I felt sick, but I kept looking because some part of me needed to know everything. There was a separate smaller bag, like a toiletry case, and inside were condoms, massage oil, and a bottle of expensive wine. Some kind of imported stuff that cost $60. This wasn't a spontaneous thing. This was planned, meticulously planned. But then I saw something that made me realize just how deep this went, how reckless she'd been. Sitting there in the back seat, like it belonged there, was a hard hat, white with reflective strips and written in black Sharpie across the front. R. Foster, Morrison and Sons. Ryan Foster's hard hat. In my wife's car. I kept searching, my hands shaking now. There was a construction lunch cooler I'd never seen before, the heavy-duty kind that keeps your food cold for 12 hours and costs $200 at Home Depot. Work gloves, size XL, sitting on the passenger floor. I wear size large. There was even a company radio, one of those yellow Motorola walkie-talkies with the Morrison and Sons frequency programmed in, the kind foremen used to coordinate with their crews. She hadn't just been sleeping with this guy. She'd been to his job sites. She'd been in his world, meeting his crew, probably laughing with his coworkers while they thought she was his girlfriend or whatever story they'd constructed. While I was busting my ass running excavators 12 hours a day in the oil fields, thinking I was providing for our future, she was playing house with some construction foreman who made more money than me. Then I saw something that made everything else fade away. Strapped into the back seat, like it was just another piece of cargo, was a booster seat. Our niece Emma's booster seat, pink and purple with little unicorns on it, still buckled in where I'd installed it 2 weekends ago, when my brother, Diego, and his family had visited from Fresno. Michelle had seen that booster seat. She had looked at it, known it was there, and still gotten into this car with Ryan Foster to drive to wherever they were going. She had been willing to risk not just her own life, but potentially a child's life if circumstances had been different. If Diego had needed us to babysit Emma, if anything had changed in the plan, that's when something fundamental shifted in me. Up until that moment, part of me had still been thinking of Michelle as my wife, as someone I loved who had hurt me, as someone I might eventually forgive or at least understand. But standing there looking at that booster seat, surrounded by another man's work gear in my wife's car, I realized I was looking at the wreckage left by someone I didn't know at all. The Michelle I married would never have been this reckless. The Michelle I married would never have planned something this elaborate. The Michelle I thought I knew didn't exist. She never had. I took photos of everything with my phone, the lingerie, the toiletry bag, the hard hat, the work gear, the booster seat. I documented it all like a crime scene, which, in a way, I guess it was. Maybe for evidence, maybe for divorce proceedings, maybe just to prove to myself later that I hadn't imagined it. Then I closed the car door, walked back to my F-250, and drove home in complete silence. My phone had 28 missed calls by then, some from the hospital, some from numbers I didn't recognize, several from Michelle's sister, Sophia. I ignored all of them. When I got home, I sat down at my computer and looked up divorce attorneys. I read reviews, compared prices, checked credentials. I did it the same way I'd research a new set of tools or a vacation destination, methodically and emotionally detached, because if I let myself feel anything, I was going to fall apart. I scheduled a consultation for the following Wednesday with a guy named Patterson who specialized in high-conflict divorces. His website said he'd been practicing family law for 25 years and had handled cases involving adultery, hidden assets, and complex property division. Exactly what I was going to need. Then I went into our bedroom and started pulling my clothes out of the closet. I wasn't moving out, not yet, but I needed to separate my things from hers because I couldn't look at our shared closet anymore without wanting to burn everything in it. Michelle's sister, Sophia, called again that afternoon. And this time, I answered. She was crying, asking me where I was, why I hadn't come to the hospital. Didn't I care that Michelle was hurt? What kind of husband abandons his wife when she's injured? I let her finish. Then I said very calmly that I couldn't be around someone who had lied to me so completely and that I was filing for divorce. Sophia went quiet. Then she asked what I was talking about. What lie? And I realized Michelle hadn't told anyone the truth. Of course she hadn't. Why would she confess to her family that she'd been living a double life? So I told Sophia everything. About calling Rachel and learning Michelle had never gone to Visalia, about the fake breakup story, about Ryan Foster being in the car, about the hard hat and the work gear and everything else I'd found in the overnight bag, about the booster seat and what that meant about the kind of risks Michelle was willing to take. Sophia didn't say anything for a long time. Then she said she needed to process this and that she'd call me back. She hung up. She didn't call back that day. And when she did start calling again a few days later, it was to beg me to visit Michelle anyway because family is family. I guess blood really is thicker than water. Or maybe she just couldn't accept that her sister was capable of something like this. Here's what I want you to understand. I'm not telling you this story to get sympathy or to prove I was right. I'm telling you because I think a lot of people stay in situations like this out of guilt or obligation or because they're worried about what other people will think. And I want you to know that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is walk away from someone who's shown you exactly who they are. Would you have gone to the hospital? Would you have tried to work it out? I'm genuinely curious what you would have done in my position. That night, I slept in the guest bedroom for the first time in 5 years. I stared at the ceiling, thinking about booster seats and lingerie and hard hats and lies. And I realized something that should have been obvious from the beginning. I wasn't grieving my wife. I was grieving a person who had never actually existed. Michelle called me on Monday morning from the hospital, and I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Maybe I wanted to hear what she'd say. Maybe I needed confirmation that I was doing the right thing. I don't know. Her voice was weak and shaky. And she asked me where I was, why I hadn't come to see her. Didn't I care that she'd been hurt? She said she'd been asking for me for 3 days and nobody would tell her where I was. She sounded genuinely confused, like she actually couldn't understand why her husband wasn't sitting by her bedside holding her hand. I didn't say anything at first. I just listened to her breathe on the other end of the line. This woman I'd shared a bed with for 5 years and felt absolutely nothing. Then I told her very calmly that I knew about Ryan Foster. There was silence. Not the kind of silence where someone's thinking of what to say. The kind of silence where someone's entire world just collapsed and they're trying to figure out how to rebuild it fast enough to salvage something. Then she started crying and saying it wasn't what I thought, that she could explain, that it was complicated and I needed to come to the hospital so we could talk in person. I asked her if she'd been with him that night. More silence. Then she said yes, but that I didn't understand the whole situation. I asked her if she'd lied about going to see Rachel. She said yes, but she'd only done it because she didn't know how to tell me the truth. I asked her if she'd packed our anniversary lingerie in her overnight bag to wear for another man. She didn't answer that one. Instead, she started talking about how much pain she was in, how scared she'd been when the car crashed, how she'd thought she was going to die, and all she could think about was me. I told her I'd spoken to Rachel, that I'd seen the car and everything in it, and that I'd already contacted a divorce attorney. She lost it then, started screaming at me through the phone, calling me heartless, asking how I could abandon her when she was lying in a hospital bed, saying I was a monster for caring more about my pride than about her safety. I let her scream until she ran out of steam. Then I said the only thing that mattered. You looked me in the eyes and lied to me. I told her that she'd planned this, that she'd used our friend as a cover story, that she'd let me help her pack a bag full of lies, and that I couldn't trust a single word that came out of her mouth anymore. She went quiet again. Then she said something that made me realize just how far gone we really were. She said that what hurt her most wasn't the accident, wasn't even losing me, but that I was being so cruel when she needed me most. Like she was the victim here, like I was the one who'd done something wrong. I filed for divorce 7 weeks after the accident. Michelle was out of the hospital by then, staying with Sophia, and my attorney served her the papers at her sister's apartment. I didn't do it to be vindictive. I did it because every day I waited was another day I was lying to myself about whether this marriage could be saved. It couldn't. Some things you can come back from, and some things you can't. And this was the kind of betrayal that burns the bridge so completely that there's nothing left to rebuild on. The divorce process was ugly. Michelle fought me on everything. The house, the savings, the furniture. Like, if she could just keep enough pieces of our life together, then maybe it would prove the marriage had meant something. Her attorney painted me as cold and unforgiving, said I'd abandoned my wife in her time of need, tried to make the affair seem like a one-time mistake that I was blowing out of proportion. My attorney presented the evidence, the phone records that I'd subpoenaed, showing months of calls and texts between Michelle and Ryan, the credit card statements showing hotel rooms and restaurants I'd never been to, charges I'd never questioned because we kept our finances mostly separate, and I trusted her. The photos I'd taken at the impound lot. It wasn't one night. It had been going on for almost 8 months. 8 months of lies. 8 months of looking me in the face every morning and pretending everything was fine. 8 months of planning and covering tracks and playing the role of faithful wife while living an entirely separate life I knew nothing about. When I saw all that evidence laid out in black and white, I felt vindicated, but also devastated, because it meant I'd been living in a fantasy for most of the past year without even knowing it. 8 months after the accident, after the divorce was finalized and the house had been sold, and we divided everything down to the last coffee mug, I called Michelle one final time. Not because I wanted closure, or because I'd forgiven her, or because I thought there was anything left to say that mattered. I called because I needed her to understand one thing that I don't think she ever had. When she answered, I could hear the hope in her voice. Like, maybe this was me calling to say I'd made a mistake, that I wanted her back. I didn't let her talk. I just told her the truth as clearly as I could. I didn't leave because you were in that car with him, I said. I left because you were willing to lie so easily, to plan so carefully, to risk so much just to have what you wanted. I left because I realized that if you could do all that, then I had no idea what else you might be capable of, and I couldn't spend the rest of my life waiting to find out. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said something about how I'd never understand what it was like to feel trapped, to need something I couldn't give her, to be desperate enough to make bad choices. Like that explained anything. Like that made it okay. I told her I hoped she found whatever she was looking for, that I genuinely meant that, but that I couldn't be part of her life anymore because I didn't know who she was and I didn't trust who she might become. Then I hung up. That was 2 months ago. I haven't spoken to her since. Sometimes people ask me if I regret not going to the hospital that night, if I wish I'd handled things differently, if I think I was too harsh. And honestly, no, I don't regret it. Because the truth is, I didn't abandon my injured wife. I protected myself from a person who'd been lying to me so long and so well that I'd started to believe the fantasy was real. And maybe that makes me cold. Maybe that makes me heartless. But it also makes me free. Some people survive car crashes. I survived a marriage to someone I never really knew. Here's what I've learned from all of this. Trust isn't just about believing someone won't hurt you. It's about believing that if they do hurt you, it'll be because they made a mistake, not because they planned it. Michelle didn't make a mistake. She made a series of calculated choices over 8 months, and each one of those choices told me exactly who she was. I just wish I'd been paying attention sooner. If there's one thing I want you to take away from my story, it's this. When someone shows you who they really are, believe them the first time. Don't wait for the second chance or the explanation or the apology. Just believe them and act accordingly. It might save you months or years of living in a lie. And to everyone out there who's ever felt guilty for walking away from someone who hurt them, you don't owe anyone your suffering. Not your spouse, not your family, not your friends, and definitely not strangers on the internet who think they know better. You owe yourself peace. And sometimes peace means walking away from people you once loved. That's not cruelty. That's survival. But here's the deeper truth I've come to understand. Betrayal doesn't just destroy trust. It destroys your ability to believe in your own judgment. The real damage isn't that someone lied to you. It's that they made you doubt everything you thought you knew about reading people, about love, about your own worth. Recovery isn't just about moving on from them. It's about learning to trust yourself again. What do you think about this story? Let me know in the comments.